starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming.
Afternoon and a warm welcome to you all. Thanks indeed for being here. Just a reminder that we're on air. That's the sign up there, and we welcome those that may be listening at home or in the office, wherever they may be. Welcome to you as well. And a reminder for those in here, if their mobiles could be switched off, as it can interfere with our recording, and we love to record these meetings so people who can't make it can listen to it at some later date. Please be seated. Thank you. So in opening the meeting, it's no apologies. Declaration of interest. Councillor McKenzie. 16.1, thank you. Councillor Cox. 8.1. Any other declaration of interest? No? Thank you. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the previous meeting held 13th of June. Deputy Mayor seconded. They all went down before I looked. Councillor Finlay, thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. There's no deputations, no petitions, community reports, and it's a pleasure to have Miss Jodie Lowe with us from the Rotary Club of Central Launceston. So Jodie, a warm welcome to you. Thanks for being here. We look forward to your report.
Thank you, and can everyone hear me firstly? Great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. At the start, I'd just like to pay tribute to the dedication, the hard work, and the wonderful community spirit of our Rotarians, their partners and families, our alumni and friends who give so much to our club. Here is a little snapshot of what we've been up to this year. In November, we celebrated our 10th anniversary of staging the Sally's Ride Tamar Valley Cycle Challenge. 457 people took part. In 2018, we donated a car purchased with Sally's Ride proceeds to Cornerstone Youth Services for youth outreach. I sincerely thank everyone in our club, also our sponsors, including the City of Launceston, all the cyclists who take part and all the organisations that generously support this event and do so much to make it a success. I'm pleased to report we're back December 1, and this year's event will support Speak Up, Stay Chatty. This year we hosted 2 inbound Rotary Youth Exchange students, Sam Tommen from Switzerland and Olav Hergersen from Norway. Wonderful to see the boys address the council last week, so thank you for that as well, and they've had an amazing year. Our outbound student, Georgia, returned home in January after a year in Italy, and Alice Lowe, who we've sponsored, she's been selected to be our outbound student next year, just waiting to hear where she's going. We are delighted this year to have joined the Rotary Club of Tamar Sunrise as a sponsor of the Rotaract Club of Tamar Valley. In March, our club hosted a professional development exchange team from New Zealand. The dedication of our team, led by Rotarian Adrian Wood, resulted in a wonderful stay for our New Zealand friends. We've pledged $10,000 to help Playgroup Tasmania build an outdoor play area at their building in Invermay. Our partnership with Ravenswood Heights Primary School was again an important focus of our service this year. Our volunteers help out with breakfast and reading club each week during school term. We also secured a $10,000 Commonwealth Bank grant for the school, and that will help them build an outdoor kitchen, so we're excited about that too. In August, our club had a wonderful vocational visit to Parliament House in Hobart, and that was organised by past President and Charter Member Peter Bushby. 50 people from our club went to a performance of Encore's Strictly Ballroom, probably with most of the people in this room as well. And we went there, we wanted to enthusiastically cheer on past President Rick Martin, who played one of the lead roles as Rico, and had a fantastic night. Well done to Encore. Finally, our members did lots of bushwalking, cycling. Some did a learn to row course. There was also a terrific fishing weekend on the East Coast. We enjoyed a number of vocational visits, end-of-month drinks, and we also had a special event for the children in our club at Tail Race Park. We volunteered at Circus Quirkus, the Women's 5K and the Tasmanian Running Festival, and we have grown our membership by at least 12 Rotarians. In closing, I'd like to sincerely thank the City of Launceston for your wonderful support of our club's efforts to empower a healthy, educated and inclusive community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jodie, and thank you. Please pass back to your club, to the Rotarians, for all the work they do in our community, which is much appreciated, not only just the fundraising, but also the building up community in different areas. Without Rotary and clubs like that, we'd have a lot worse community than we have today, so we have a great community. So thank you very much for that work. It's public question time. Questions on notice are there for those that have asked those, and the answers are there. So public questions without notice. Any public questions without notice? Please just state your name and address. Thank you.
Yeah, Christopher Green, otherwise known as Gus, at 5 Milford Place. I'd like to congratulate Rotary on their contribution to the city, and I think it's rather fitting that Jodie has introduced a very important subject matter for today. Some 100 years ago, on the 29th of June, a significant event occurs in this very chamber. That is, the peace deal of the Great War is signed, and it arrives in the city early on the 29th of June 1919. Mr Mayor, I feel it's appropriate today that we recognise that event in council and in this chamber as where it was recognised 100 years ago. And the peace of our city is under challenge again, the whole peace of the world. And it's rather ironical that the G20 meet this week to see if we can solve the world's problems. But I think it'd be fitting if we do recognise in our minutes 100 years ago that this occurred in this very chamber.
Thank you. That will be done now. Thank you very much for bringing that up. Appreciate that. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Jim Dickinson, 261 West Hamer Road. Got a question regarding the building heights and the massing study report, which was approved a couple of meetings back. I'm a bit confused as to, in actual fact, what was approved or the areas that were approved. So in other words, could you tell me where the 14.5 metre buildings can be constructed and where the 24 metre high buildings can be constructed?
Yeah, well, in Pacific areas, I think we've got the 24 as an overall guideline. The 14.5 is more for street fronts and areas around the street frontage. The outside of that, though, any development, if it fits in with the right criteria, can be even higher than the 24 metres as well. I don't think you want to answer it in any more detail, but... General Manager.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. The area that is concerned hasn't changed from that was advertised, and perhaps we will draw. I'll send that to you out of session so you are familiar with the area that it actually that it does include. So that's unchanged from that which was previously circulated and went through community consultation. So the only thing that changed in respect to that first position was around the mechanism to be able to consider buildings of height greater than 24 metres within the planning scheme by way of a yet to be developed performance criteria. It was previously intended that would be dealt with by way of a planning scheme amendment, so outside of the council decision-making process in that respect. So that's the change. But in terms of the plan, we'll make sure that we make that link available so that you've got that.
That's the actual query, as to what areas, within what sort of street perimeters or...
Yeah, look, we'll give you that information.
No, but the point is, I know you'll give it to me, but I'm not sure that council understands what they've approved. I mean, the
maps.
Yeah, but there are maps available. I'm not sure what you're getting at.
Well, previously, 14.5 metres could only be built, I think it was precinct ABC, or might be precinct 3 or precinct B.
You're talking about the draft.
Well, yeah, it was being altered 2 or 3 times.
That's right, that's
That's
right.
right. So, and one of the alterations was the building height. Initially, in the central area, it was 14.5 metres, which at one stage got back to 9 and then got raised back to 14.5. I probably don't have a problem there, but there was never a height of 24 metres in the city centre, which can now occur. I'm just wondering whether council is aware of that, or it's very vague to me.
Okay, well, we'll give you more detail, but the councillors here would be aware of it, I'm sure. Thank you.
We'll do that in writing, so we know precisely what we're talking about, please. Because
we'll send you...
We'll do it, because at the moment, for example, you could build a 24 metre building in the centre of the town, and I'm fairly sure that was not what was intended.
Anyway, we'll give some more detail to you. And
The plan is on the public record. I'll provide the link.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Precisely where you can build a 24 metre building. Precisely.
Yeah, we'll give you that information so that you can see. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I will allow you, sir.
I think it's rather fitting of what is going to happen on Saturday, and that's the opening to the public for the first time of Macquarie House.
True.
I think it's very fitting that we can sit here 190 years on from the building of that wonderful structure, of which there is another structure similar in the city today. It's the only two, I believe. And I believe it's a wonderful opportunity, since it's a council job and a council construction, that we recognise the site. And in doing that, I think we should recognise the late Henry Reid and his contribution to the city. That whole corner should be properly done in a nice plaque recognising the contribution of the 1830s that he made as a merchant and built this city to what we have today. And as we all know, his house was on the corner where the fountain is, or whatever you like to call that water feature. And I just think that through the Heritage Advisory Group, money should be made available for the correct history. And since it's come through, it was earmarked for demolition, as we all realise, and we saved that, and we've saved it for what we see modern technology can deliver to the city.
Yep.
And I would like to see the councillors take that on board and to see what we can do, because I did speak at this council meeting some 12 months ago about recognising Henry Reid, and there was all appreciation for that.
Yep, thank you. I mean, that's already in train, and I believe you'll find there is going to be a plaque with an explanation of the history right where you'd like it to be. It's already happening. It's in train.
It's already happening.
Well, it should be pretty well happening very soon, isn't it? Correct? Yep. It's already planned and it's in the budget.
Right, okay. Well, I'd like to ask another question on Saturday's symposium. Could we have who are the project team, please?
The project team.
There's a project team running a symposium on Saturday at the museum. I'd like to know the project team before I turn up.
I can tell you some of the speakers, but who's the team? Who's got that? Shane? Yep.
It's a City of Launceston event, and the project team is a collaboration of many staff and officers. So I'm going to say there would be 20 or 30 staff that have been involved in preparation of the event. So
the project team is from council, I take it. That's
yes,
what
correct.
You're trying.
Oh, definitely it's from council, yeah.
Right, okay. Thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
Obviously that phone wasn't turned down, all right. No more questions. Thank you. We'll move on. So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in agenda item 8, the planning authority. So under 8.1 we do have one speaker, Mitchell Lloyd. Oh, sorry, got to read out the rules. Sorry first.
You're right. So only residents and ratepayers or those on the City of Launceston electoral roll may address an item on the agenda. Before speaking, please state your name and address or property owned in Launceston. You may speak for up to 2 minutes. No extension of time is permitted. You must speak for or against the recommendation and not ask questions of officers or council officers or attempt to enter into debate with councillors or council officers. Statements can only be made either directly relating to supporting the recommendation or arguing against it. Comments and statements are not to be defamatory, offensive or abusive or be designed to embarrass any person, including councillors or council officers. Statements are not to be repetitive of statements or points already made. Several people speaking a common position should nominate a single speaker on their behalf. The Mayor may ask a member of the gallery to cease speaking if the above procedures are not followed. Following hearing the comments from the gallery, councillors will then consider the item.
Thank you. So Mitchell, thank you.
Thank you. Mitchell Lloyd, level 1, 114 Hobart Road, from Design to Live. We designed the proposal and obviously hearing for it. Essentially, landowners have the right to develop their property as they see fit, as long as they have regard to the neighbours and the impact that it's going to have on their neighbours and the potential loss of amenity of what they're doing. Loss of amenity is really up to next door to determine what they consider a loss that they can live with or a loss that they can't. It should be up to them to decide what they consider is a fair loss of amenity or not. Given that the neighbours were given the opportunity to lodge a formal representation or ask questions of the planners and they didn't, we can only assume that they're in acceptance of the proposal. Due to the solar orientation, the topography of these lots on the lower side of Levis Crescent, it's extremely difficult to design a dwelling that you meet all the acceptable solutions the planning scheme, especially in this case without shading that southern site boundary. Prior to these clients purchasing this lot, we're actually engaged by a local builder to design the house next door that we are shadowing. They were just going to use a standard project home floor plan. I actually warned them against it having living up that northwestern boundary because it was pretty much a given when next door got developed that it was going to get shaded. If we could have convinced them to put the living out the northeast, they would have got more sun, more views, and then there's less of the impact when they develop next door. They didn't take this advice on board and proceeded with the standard project home floor plan. So in summary, I just appreciate if you can consider the following. Some studies are conducted on the shortest day of the year when the sun is at the lowest point in the sky, throwing the longest shadow possible, and it's very much a worst case scenario.
Yeah, thank you. Your time is up. Can you just conclude in a sentence or two?
Yes. The nature of the lot makes it very difficult, and then due to the steepness of the lot also makes it difficult. We can't push further to the north because of privacy, overlooking up to 3 metres off the side. And then most importantly, we didn't receive a representation, meaning the people affected by this aren't opposed to it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the only speaker I have. Anybody else want to speak? No? So we'll, anyone happy to move a motion from the councillors? Councillor Finlay, as it is. It's moved. Seconded, Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Finlay?
Thank you, Mayor. At the outset, in speaking to this item, it was both acknowledged by the officers and I would like to also personally acknowledge that it's unusual for the officers of council to recommend refusal on items when we're considering them as a planning authority, and they generally attempt to work as closely as possible with developers and representatives in the process to mediate an outcome that is reasonable in terms of consideration for the planning scheme and to find an outcome possible. So in reading the reports today and visiting the site, it was important for a few things to be clarified. One is that it is important that someone owns their property and they're entitled to develop as they see fit with regard to neighbours, but that has to be done with the hierarchy of the planning scheme at the top of that consideration. And although acceptable solutions aren't always possible to be met absolutely, performance criteria are provided that discretions can be sought on properties when required, particularly if the nature of the lot or the steepness of the land has to be considered. The other thing that's really important to consider in planning items, and we don't always reinforce this at the table, but this gives an opportunity to do so, is that as members of a planning authority, when we're considering the advice of our officers, we're actually just required to consider the property and not the people. And so although, again, it's unusual that in this circumstance there are no representatives, this is the moment where the planning officers and the planning authority come to actually bear best effort, that without consideration of, well, with due consideration for the people in the community, but without consideration for the individuals, the properties may remain beyond the current purchase and the current ownership into the future. We have to be making decisions in the best interests of the experience of living in that site as the property. So the recommendation today was deeply considered by the officers. There was consideration of, if developed within the building envelope, would it be possible to provide something that was reasonable for the scheme? Also knowing that attempts are made to mediate an outcome where changes could be suggested or taken on board throughout a process, and if something is submitted and then without change but doesn't meet the requirements of the scheme, then unfortunately is the position of council where officers make a recommendation refusal, and our assessment of that report in consideration with the scheme is seen to be reasonable. So on all counts of considering the physical property, considering the application of the planning scheme and having regard for solar access, which is consistently always considered on that date as the worst possible time, and that provides a consistent approach to all planning and amenity and solar access issues, it's reasonable today to accept the recommendation for refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. Councillor Finlay has very clearly articulated where this application, I guess, is deficient. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. When we sit as a planning authority and we have this advice in front of us, it's always, I guess, cognizant on people to understand that where solutions are sort of available, whether they meet those. So as we work through the report, one of the first things that jumps out, particularly on page 12, it talks about where this particular development isn't consistent. It highlights very clearly, it says that it's the proposed development is for residential light single dwelling, which generally is considered to be consistent. However, this development significantly overshadows the adjoining dwelling. So as we as councillors sitting as a planning authority, that advice is very, very clear to us where it doesn't comply. As we work through the report, Mr Mayor, under development standards, it highlights again in that area where it's not consistent. And as we go through and we look at where it relies on performance criteria on page 14, it also highlights where it doesn't comply. So I just wanted to highlight those areas that are very, very clearly pointed out where it doesn't comply. Mr Lloyd made a very valid point in his remarks where he talked about the fact that because the neighbour hadn't complained, that may mean that they don't have an issue, and that's a fair point, because often they do very quickly contact the council. But I guess the key point too, as Councillor Finlay touched on, just because someone doesn't complain doesn't mean that they necessarily... There's times where people may be away or aren't aware of the process fully of what they have to do. So we can't take no complaint as tacit acceptance of it. So I'm sad that I've got to not support this, because obviously I like to support development in our city, and that area up there is one that's obviously expanding and new. And as Mr Lloyd also rightly pointed out, it's nice where people can build something and be in control of something on their block and come up with something that they're happy with. And I do agree with his point. However, when we sit as a planning authority, we do need to make sure that things comply, and I've highlighted 3 areas there in this where it doesn't comply. I'd hope that after today, whatever the outcome be, if it is the recommendation is supported as it's presented to us and it's not supported for approval, that some work can be done to make it comply, because it does point out very, very clearly where the issue lies, as I read it, Mr Mayor. So, yeah, I will be supporting the recommendation in front of us.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. I made a statement last week that, or 2 weeks ago, that our role is to review the information provided to us by officers, make due inquiry as to its veracity, listen to both sides of the argument in relation to it, and then make a decision based on the facts of the case. And I think no difference in this case, and I must admit when I read the report I found it quite unusual that we'd have an officer making a decision that we shouldn't support the application where there were no representations. And I think over my 7 years on council I've probably had less than a handful of recommendations against approval, which to me suggests our organisation looks to approve projects rather than not approve projects, but they also take their responsibility in relation to a planning authority seriously. And then they give us advice, and they are the, I guess, the skilled planners. We're not, but I guess I've been around the table for 7 years and take on board the comments they're making, and then can analyse in my own mind as to whether things happen. And I guess the inquiries that we've made and discussions we've had with the officers today and being on site and seeing the buildings, they would say it's not insignificant, the levels of non-compliance in regards to the planning scheme, and they also believe that there are opportunities for a building on the site to fit within the planning scheme and to deliver an outcome for somebody living on that next block of land. So I think it's important that we understand that they have looked at it and they've tried to make it work, and at this stage haven't come to a decision where the developer and the council have seen eye to eye in regards to that. I think it's also important to understand that, yes, the neighbours are there, but there are reasons why we need to take the planning scheme into consideration and not the individuals who live in properties. I mean, I can think of examples where people control a lot of property in a particular area and say, okay, well, I'll develop here and develop there, and they're not going to complain if they're developing on blocks jointly to each other. So there's good reason why we need to disseminate or discreetly take ourselves away from who lives next door. It's actually going back and applying the properties, the planning scheme, and therefore I see today as something that I'll also be supporting the motion as put forward.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. I too will be supporting the recommendation from planning officers, and I'd just like to add, already other councillors have mentioned, of course, that there were no representations from the neighbours, and there could be any number of reasons that there are barriers to that on this particular instance. But we're not just making decisions for today, for the current people who live in that house, but for future inhabitants of all of our communities. So in this instance, I don't think that's a direct line of argument that we should be taking into consideration, and I won't be able to support this development.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Finlay, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. So the motion is carried as it is. We then move on to Mayor's announcements. Oh, so no longer sit as a planning authority. Thank you. Let the room. There's just a couple of things I do want to mention, and one in particular was on the Sunday the 16th of June. Attended the Boer War Remembrance Day on behalf of Council, and the organisers want to thank our staff, General Manager, for the way they prepared and cleaned the site and looked after it and helped. So they really want that passed on to all of our staff, especially those who were hands-on. But they thank the support that Council was given and for to be able to have the ceremony there on that Sunday. It was great to attend the Subaru rally on the Friday the 21st of June, the Friday night, and I think there was some 2,000 people-ish around. I didn't get numbers, but I'm trying to estimate a crowd, not my skill, but there was quite a few people there, and it was a good crowd, and I thoroughly enjoyed, for those that I spoke with after, I had a little walk around with some of the people. They really enjoyed themselves and thought it was fantastic for our city, and great to see people out on a cold night in Launceston. And then on Tuesday the 25th of June, just gone, it was really pleasing to be able to have the Brazilian students that are visiting here come through Council, and the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Mackenzie were there as well. And just to hear them and their stories of how they've been here since February and been studying at the Launceston College and what they think of our city. It's really good to get their perspectives. And I think the comment that really struck me was when they said, look, Launceston is a very, very clean city. And that was very important to hear that and to know that, because sometimes people think it's not, but for others outside to come in and say that, I think that's very encouraging. So we can pass that on to our staff as well, that we are appreciated by a lot of people that do come here and see this beautiful city. And that's it from myself. Thank you. Councillor reports. Deputy Mayor.
Mr Mayor, sometimes it's important to push beyond your comfort zone, and today I rise to talk about the 10-year achievements of the Launceston Aquatic Centre. It was a pleasure, along with yourself and other members of Council, both staff and elected representatives, to attend the 10-year celebrations. Of course, there's been a week-long calendar of events, including competitions, giveaways, and even squirt on display at the Aquatic Centre. And why I rise to celebrate that milestone is to say what an achievement it was for a council that I wasn't part of to have the vision to make that decision to redevelop that aquatic centre, to enter into the partnerships that exist, to allow and afford young people the opportunity to train and use that facility, schools and meets, and also in more recent years the decision that I was part of to fully realise the potential of that centre through the dry gym facilities. It is a credit to all of the staff who worked so hard there, some in fact celebrating 10 years, the whole 10 years of the redevelopment as part of the staff, if not longer. It was great to welcome back former Alderman Ted Sands and the former Director Rod as well, and to celebrate that milestone. But congratulations to the General Manager and the staff for the work that they continue to do up at that great facility.
Thank you. Any other councillor reports? Councillor Spencer, you can stay seated if you need to, or you're right.
I'd just like to thank the councillors and staff for the support since I've done my league. It's been great and much appreciated. Thank you.
We know you're healing well, and it's great to see you again here today. Thank you. Any other councillor reports? No? Questions by councillors? Any questions by councillors? Councillor Walker.
Questions without notice? Yep, it has been brought to my attention that the Launceston City Council is sponsoring an event next week, I believe, by way of a civic reception and perhaps other means, the Miss Teen Australia event. And it also seems to have the endorsement of Tourism Northern Tasmania as well. I'd like to know the nature of the Council's commitment to this event, which by all appearances seems to be little more than a beauty competition for children, including a swimsuit parade. And I'd like to make note that, you know, there are various competitions in this area, and some of them don't do this, and some of them do require entrance to support charities as part of their work. I'd also like to know the process that's been undergone in this council and the policies in place to vet events such as this, if that is required, events that judge children on their appearances, and I'd like to understand the process that has allowed Launceston City Council's name to be associated with this event in any way. In this age, I would like to think that the council has gone beyond being involved in these type of events.
Walker, this is question time.
Yes.
So you've asked a question, we can...
So, well, in summary, I'd certainly like to get answers to those questions, those two questions.
Thank you. We'll take that on notice and get back to you.
Thank you.
Councillor Gibson, Deputy Mayor, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to ask the question, I'm on. Wanted to ask the question, Mayor, with regard to a response that's been provided here, could it be taken on notice that we see where we're at with the reforming of the outcomes and achieving the outcomes of our mall, and what further steps in terms of greenery and the like that are still to be implemented? Could we look at that down the track on notice?
Yep, that'll be taken on notice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? We'll move on. We'll move on to 12.1, Tender Review Committee meeting. Someone happy to move that? Councillor Cox. Seconded Councillor McKenzie. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Cox? Oh, thank you. Councillor McKenzie. Can I put the motion? Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 13.1, the Councillor Workshop Report. Councillor Finlay moved and seconded. Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Finlay? Councillor Soward? Any councillor wish to? Deputy Mayor.
I just want to highlight the great work of Fermentation Tasmania, the work that they're doing in that space, the connections with our Launceston DNA project, the opportunities that exist there are very exciting, and I think that is definitely a project not only through an NTDC lens but also through a city lens for us to keep close to and to embrace wherever their real estate ends up.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Can I put the motion? Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We then move on to 15.1, Queechee Road, Norwood. Someone happy to move? Move Councillor McKenzie. Seconded Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie?
I just think it's a great opportunity for some of our councillors who haven't had the pleasure of doing this to take the opportunity to do this time.
Oh, we've got to put names in there, I assume, wouldn't we? 4. I think we should do it now.
Well, you don't have to, we can do it now.
If we got 4, but otherwise, how do we do it otherwise?
Oh, well, once you've made the decision, we can appoint.
Appoint people. Oh, who's not in? Oh, everybody's here. So do you want to include it with names?
Happy to be guided by the council.
Councillor McKenzie, as you moved it, or do you want to?
I'd be happy to see if there were volunteers. If not, we'll need to do it outside the meeting, I would think.
Okay. No volunteers? Councillor Walker's a volunteer. Councillor Harris is a volunteer. We're getting there.
If I'd just like to say, having some experience on that group might be of advantage.
Councillor McKenzie, and one more. Councillor Finlay. That's the 4. So that's been moved and seconded. Anyone else Councillor Soward wish to speak?
We're delighted to speak, Mr Mayor, and I'm absolutely delighted with the 4 nominees we have. I think we've got a wonderful blend of experience and newer members. I think they'll do a super job. And without sounding flippant, having, and I'm sure there are others around the table that have been part of that, it is a very interesting process that you will learn a lot from. So, yeah, great bunch.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. By affirmation. We now move on to 16.1. We do have some speakers for 16.1. Mr Steve Henty.
Steve Henty, City Prime, Launceston Central City. The issue, conversations, debate and all conversations around parking in Launceston is complex, sometimes heated and often very divided. There's issues such as whether we have enough parking or total capacity, whether the parking mix is right, who should be managing the bulk of the parking, and even whether we think 60 to 90 minutes free parking is a good idea. But today we're discussing a motion on to explore whether providing the first 60 to 90 minutes in approximately 800 council-owned pay-on-exit car spaces for free will drive increased visitation to Launceston Central City. There's obviously costs for taking action. There's also costs for not taking action. So a report was prepared, and the evidence in this report prepared by Council would suggest that as there's no excess supply outside of the already free parking period, as things sit now, offering free parking will have little to no effect on driving visitation into the CBD. It's essentially a supply and demand question. Without any other evidence-based research to suggest otherwise, this report has asked the question and answered the question. And given the divergence of opinions, we must rely on evidence. One thing that is important to raise is that this conversation around free parking is stemmed from the community. So it's important to emphasise, regardless of how you vote, that if we want to bring everyone into the discussion, we are relying on an evidence in a report, and the council needs to be transparent and open with community and provide the detail of that report so that the information can be open to rigour. It may not change some people's minds, but at least they'll be informed and have the same information as those around the table. To drive visitation, there are many factors, too many for a 2-minute time slot to expand in. But can I ask, when we talk about, when we move forward and talk about access to the city, we frame it not around cars, but around the movement of people into and around the city. People don't come to Launceston to look at pavers or park their cars. They come here for the offering, the opportunity, and for activation. It's a complex problem that needs a complex, discipline-agnostic solution.
Robin Smith.
Thank you, Robin Smith. I work at a cafe in Brisbane Street Mall, Coffee Republic. This is an excellent report, but I pick up from what Mr Henty said on behalf of City Prom. I don't believe it's completely balanced. It seems to miss the counter-argument. Myself, I had been trading in the mall for about half a decade when the last free out trial, and that actually didn't work for me, unfortunately. But this report to you that you're going to probably pull apart, in page 50, it has a section, second paragraph, talking about the Centre for Retail Research in the UK. I did look at the report to which that draws information from, and got quite a shock. Online shopping, and we do know Launceston it is affecting us. That's a graph of the growth over about the last 8 years in the UK. And there is another graph that shows what people want, the customers. And the graph looks like that. The top 3 wishes of the shopping community are in reverse order. More free areas for parking, that's 57% of respondents. Greater variety of stores is 61%, and the highest that they think towns need is free parking at 64%. I spoke to the professor that wrote that report, and he was familiar with Australia. He spoke of people that have a behavioural economics factor where they will try and save 80p to drive out of town to avoid paying the parking charges is that that's what we're dealing with. Isn't that the bid, is it?
That's the bid, is it? No, sorry.
But this is an awful lot of money. The proposed $500,000 or more is actually more than the entire annual budget for CityProm. But I would ask Council and CityProm and the traders to put together a better proposal for parking initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have no more speakers. That's all that I have. Yep. So we have the motion. Councillor Finlay moves. Is there a seconder? Councillor Dawkins. You wish to speak, Councillor Finlay?
I do wish to speak. Thank you, Mayor. And can I acknowledge the officer from CityProm here today and the way in which he presented his assessment of the report. Often in the public realm, members of the community, either representatives of organisations or individuals themselves, don't always have the same runway that we do to understand and interpret information. We have the benefit of a lot of workshops and a lot of discussions internally and building up over time to form our position. So it's nice to see when a report is circulated publicly that the details within can be considered in the same way with the same sort of clarity that we arrive at today. I think it's a valid question. If people would like access to some of the deeper data underpinning the report, then maybe that can be made available at some point. However, even without that data, I think the report, and it's not often that we stand here and acknowledge and thank officers for the work that they've done, but with this report, when it was received at workshop and again in preparation for today, it is a really good report. It's really clear in the way it steps out. It's a complex, where there's a lot of complex issues happening within the central and greater Launceston area. And this is just seeking to ask a question about one small part of it, but the report does bring in a range of data and information to consider in making our decision today. For me, it can be distilled down into three really quite clear points. One is that the report absolutely reinforces that the introduction of the trial is not something that would be reasonable to do. What it actually highlights is that, in my mind, for this small part of many complex systems going on all at the same time, there are three things that we could do well to address in partnership with the community and with business, and that is that we've got a capacity issue. And although we've been encouraged not to talk about cars and to talk about people, in actually we've got a long-term project before us to positively support change in behaviour in people. And one of the things that we need to positively change is the way that people use vehicles. And until that happens, we do have a capacity issue. And one of the reasons why this recommendation can't be supported is because we don't actually have the capacity to provide for it. So I think as a council, I know we've got the parking strategy. That's a piece of work internally being done. I think it's reasonable to say, respectfully, that that has taken some time. And I think actually if we can put a priority on that to bring it to its conclusion, things like consideration of extra decks on Bathurst Street that would allow for commuters, for CBD professional retail workers, for people visiting the city in the central area to actually park and access might alleviate some of the concerns or requests for this sort of short-term parking initiative. It's really clear as well across the state of Tasmania, but perhaps impacting Launceston and northern Tasmania more than other areas is the deficiency of our public transport system. So this report really clearly says it's not a great idea to implement this, but if we had a far greater way to connect people through our communities into the centre of the city where they could efficiently access the centre of the city and efficiently return from where they wanted to be, in a way that there's a long-term process there, but I think that's something we need to be actively working on in our transport vision, and help people support the changes in behaviour. There are some free parks available, not too far out of town. There are many people that choose to use those now and walk in to use and enjoy multiple destinations within the CBD at the moment. But that's obviously if you're used to a certain type of interacting in the CBD and you like to drive around the block and park outside the front of the shop, that's going to take some time to shift. But there are people utilising the CBD in that way at the moment. So for me, I'm grateful for the report. I think it's really clear. It absolutely has my support to not implement this, but then just to do that and do nothing more doesn't work. We do have a challenge before us. We need to work actively with businesses and with our community to address those challenges. It's complex, it will take time, but I think we can get some quick wins and we've got some longer term issues to address. But looking at the capacity of our car parking on the periphery, where people can park at a reasonable rate and access the CBD, and keeping pushing with the public transport changes that are due to happen in January and that we can continue to push for them to be greater, is the beginning. But as the representative from CityProm said, we need to now dig deep and work hard, and it will be hard, to continue to find some solutions to what are global, national, not just local issues around what's happening in town centres across the country.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. Not to go over too much of what Councillor Finlay has already said, but perhaps just consider that we will have a parking strategy, as mentioned, but we'll also have the Dr. Grimmer study on retail habits. I think that those are two very important pieces of information, and I think it's time that we did have a timeline for the parking strategy. We do need to know when that's going to be brought to council so that we can understand how we can discuss that with the changing retail landscape. We also need to understand the demographics of our city. There's been so many studies done on this presently. We need to be able to communicate that information. We know that younger people shop online, or younger-minded people. We know that we have an ageing baby boomer bubble who are not necessarily online shoppers, but also not necessarily spending a lot of their discretionary income on retail items. Because for many, they've collected everything they've needed in their lives. You know, they've got lifelong clothing, they've got patterns of behaviour, and they're not necessarily going to be the ones that are going to change the retail landscape. I'd also suggest that we haven't done enough on traffic calming. If we want to make our city somewhere that people want to spend more time and have those opportunities for incidental shopping, we need to make the city centre a more attractive place for people. It's still not a people-oriented city centre. It's still very much a car-oriented city centre. And we know that that is a barrier. There are still people moving through the city every single day just to get to the other side with I'm not sure what the percentage is, but the percentage isn't high of those who are stopping. So we've known this for a long time, and we've known this as a part of the City Heart project, absolutely vital to making sure that project flies. And it's not flying at the moment. So we need to keep moving through these strategies, tie them together under that City Heart banner, and make our city centre a more attractive place to be. I also suggest that the few dollars that people spend on parking is not a barrier to retail success. If you're going to spend less than $5 to come into the city, and that money would somehow be better off spent in a retail outlet, well, that might be so, but you're going to need a lot of those $5 spends to make a difference. We know that retail's changing. We know that service providers are growing. Every time a retail outlet closes, we get a therapeutic centre, some other kind of offering that adds to the city landscape. But it's not going back to retail, no matter how much we wish it would. We are not going back. We are in the throes of the digital age now, and we're here to stay.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. And like the speakers before me, I'd like to thank Mr Frost and his team for the significant amount of work that they've put into this report over a period of time. I want to start with the fact that it's referenced in the document in front of us that there's a bit of a theme there that council have tried this before and it failed. Mr Smith, as a long-standing business owner in the mall, actually highlighted that during his time there. 2006 was when council had a look at a trial of this, 2006. So I want to just highlight a couple of things about 2006, Mr Mayor. In 2006, MySpace was the largest social media network in the world. In 2006, Pirates of the Caribbean, #1 movie. In 2006, Chicken Feed was still around. In 2006, your good self, Mr Mayor, and Councillor Finlay are the only two remaining members of that council from 2006. So I guess my point is 2006 is a fair while ago. The world was a a different place in a lot of ways. And as previous speakers and the members of the community who spoke today, a lot's changed. Councillor Dawkins made a very good point that stayed with me some meetings ago, where she highlighted some data she had, and that I think it was Launceston, or the 7250 postcode might be one of the biggest online,
7 or 8.
highest online shoppers in the country. So that's a challenge that wasn't around in 2006. This is a very, very complex problem, Mr Mayor, and whilst the report highlights we tried it in 2006, whether it would work in 2019 I don't know, because we haven't tried it. Mr Mayor, I want to highlight some other information which I think is extremely relevant in guiding this discussion today. I'm very confident in saying, with the 12 people around this table and the probably 20 others who put their hand up in October last year to be councillors, every single one of us around this table, and I've seen this time and again from our actions, we're people who listen to our community. We are. I'm very confident in saying that. I don't like to speak for other councillors, but I'm very confident that we're people who speak for our community. I've spent some time since the report came out in front of us today looking through the ABC Facebook page and website, the Examiner Facebook page, Chile LAFM Facebook page, where all of them in various ways said, this is coming to council today, what do you reckon? What are your thoughts? Inviting members of the community to provide feedback. And those are very different groups, there's different people that belong to them, but by and large, and I know we're not talking PhD level analysis here, but there was around about 90% of the people who took the time to contribute saying that they believed that parking costs were a barrier to shopping and were in support of some sort of free time in the city to do their shopping. So I think it's beholden on me, as someone who, I was one of the people that put my hand up and said, I'm happy to listen to my community. This is our community speaking. Now again, as I said, not that we should bolt the colours to the mast on that one and say that's academically sound and every single one of those people live in Launceston, because I know they wouldn't. It's just interesting feedback that was invited independently by those 4 different groups. The other thing, Mr Mayor, all of us around this table know is that we all know the economic affordability issues that Northern Tasmania has. Time and again, we know the challenges that people have in our economy, in our city, with being able to afford things. And to me, Councillor Dawkins is right, you know, in what she said about that $5. It's going to take lots of $5 to make a difference. And you're right, I don't disagree with you, Councillor Dawkins. But when people are saying that that's their barrier, they're saying that that's their barrier. They're saying it to me, they're saying it to others, they're saying it to those ABC, Examiner, Chile, LAFM. I'm not going to say to them, you're lying, because I don't think they're lying. I think part of the challenge is one that Mr Smith raised, Mr Mayor, about behavioural economics, where people will say to me it costs too much to park in the city, but they'll spend a mint driving around to go to other parts of the town in their car on petrol, which again makes no sense to me at all. This council, Mr Mayor, and I've plugged this as many other councillors have, offer a free parking after 3:30. And they go, oh, that doesn't suit me to come into town. And I've said, well, but if you want to save a few dollars, wouldn't you do that? So behavioural economics is an issue. I'm very, very interested in how the rest of the discussion unfolds. There's been some great and interesting viewpoints so far. My big thing, Mr Mayor, that I hope that comes out of this discussion is that I want to see people become part of the solution. This is not something that Mr Hendy and his organisation CityProm will fix. It's not something that this council will fix. It is down to people's behaviour.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Your time is up. Do you need to...
Yes, please.
Extension. Moved Councillor Cox, seconded Councillor Harris. All those in favour, raise your hand. That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you. It's about people being part of the solution. People being part of the solution by what they choose to do with their parking behaviour. I'm sure councillors have had people contact them and say, go crook about the price of parking or about being booked for a ticket, and you find that they've parked on a 1 hour metre and tried to do 3 hours worth of stuff. You know, they've gone out for a meal and grabbed some school shoes for the children and paid a bill or something. And you say, well, why didn't you park in a car park? So we have this mentality, I think Councillor Finlay touched on it, where people have to park outside everywhere they visit, or even better, my favourite one is where they go crook about the parking, do that, and then drive all around the city to the next job. So spending money on petrol makes no sense. So we have to have everyone being part of the solution. I'm a huge advocate and have been for a while with an extra deck on the Bathurst Street car park, and I've also been a very strong advocate for the metro services being more, or the transport services being more available and more relevant. There's not much point running buses every hour trying to work in with people. So I look forward to others and their contributions, Mr Mayor. But like I said, if we're going to make a decision today and say we're not going to trial something because we tried it in 2006, that worries me a little. It's a long, long time ago, and in the space of the world of commerce and business, an extra long time ago. And I think how attitudes change over time. I remember as a community member looking at the idea of recycling in the city and how people said that wouldn't work. I look at the green waste bins when that was. I remember a former councillor saying, "Where would you put the third bin in your backyard? Why could we do that for?" Well, this could be another one of those things where we haven't tried it. We tried it in 2006, different times. Anything we can do to help, I think, is worthwhile. I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks for the officers doing the report. There's a lot of work gone into that. I've had it work as a Sparky, around 50 to 100 people tell me they don't want to come to the city because of the parking. They'd rather go to Kings Meadows, Mowbray, and I said, well, come to the city. It's the parking, a big issue, keeping them out. I think we need to do it for at least 12 months, maybe 2 years. I've had 3 retailers ring me and say, please support it. As councillors, I think we should be trying and trying to help the retailers. Hobart's got free parking, it's working. For example, Ulverston is thriving, Burnie's dying. No empty shops in Ulverston, their main street's busy now more. A lot of people come from Burnie to shop in Ulverston. Like Mr Smith said, they don't worry about a bit of petrol if they go free parking. I'd like to move a motion to actually take 1% out of the budget to cover our cost to do it, if that is possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, are you going to move that as an alternate motion?
Yep.
Or, okay, well. No, well, can't do it now then, is that what you're saying? Because we have to give. Well, we've just approved the budget as a council, so it makes it very difficult.
Okay.
But anyway, see how the rest of the discussion goes. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, fellow councillors. I, like all of you, want to thank the council officers for the work that they have done to prepare this report, but I do feel that the report probably had its outcome predetermined, and unfortunately what we've been given doesn't really answer the request that I felt we made, which was we want to implement a 60 to 90 minute free parking trial. And so I will foreshadow that I'll, depending on what happens at this motion, that there may be another motion moved, which notes the evidence provided in the report on the council's multi-dex car park, and requests the General Manager to prepare a report that provides various options for the introduction of a free parking service in our multi-deck car park for 60 to 90 minutes, and should be presented to this meeting in August, along with the outcomes of the Shopping the City report. Now, having said that, there is a few other comments I wish to make about what is in the report. As I said, it was full of wonderful information. I did request some further detail because I'm a detail nut, and I do thank the council officers for doing that for me. The 2 car parks that we are really talking about here are Patterson Street West and Patterson Street East, both of which have a number of spots that are longer term rentals, and so decreases their capacity slightly. But more importantly, the detail shows that on average during a day, a lot of those spots are actually being used what I call commuter parking rather than shopper parking. And any influence that we have to move a commuter out of what is a shopping car park will have a flow-on effect down the track. And so we need to be very careful of that, and hence it's one of the things why I think we need to have a further investigation of that. Just picking a couple of days at random, in Patterson Street West, it had 287 spots, 24 are long-term rentals, 90 had parked for longer than 5 hours, and that only left 173 of that 287 spots, or around about 60% was actually available to a shopper to come in and find a spot to park in. And that presents the supply problem that we need to address. Others have talked about multi-storey car parks and perhaps putting another deck or two on top of Bathurst Street, and certainly something I would support as well. But again, we need to understand what the costs and process is to do that, hence the requirement for the report from the General Manager. I also fully agree that we need to re-educate shoppers, that if people do complain about parking in the city and they're complaining about getting a parking ticket because they weren't able to go over their hour, they clearly parked in the wrong spot. And that's something that we need to educate, and I'd like to see an education program directed on that, so that if people are going to come into town, they do in fact park in the most appropriate. But to do that, they need to have the capacity to do so. Hence, that's why some of the car parking spots in Patterson Street East and West may need to be priced appropriately so that commuters don't park there. I'll leave that to the General Manager to decide what that may be, but it may be, as is in Hobart, where there's an escalating fee the longer you pay, the longer you stay in the car park. And I think that has certain benefits to motivate people to only stay and do what we want them to do in those particular shopper car parks. I agree fully, better public transport would help, but unfortunately we don't control Metro, and they are the only public transport supplier. And as everyone has previously mentioned, the people is the secret to increasing retail trade, and having people walking past your shop is the single greatest way to do that. And so we do need to get the people in the city in the first place. Online shopping, yes, in 2015 less than 10% of Australians had a smartphone or used a smartphone to make an online purchase. In 2017, just 2 years later, 20% of online purchases were being made from a smartphone. So the demographics are changing. We cannot hold back the tide, and it is something that Tasmanians are amongst the worst or highest users, depending which way you look at it, of internet shopping, and in some areas we are amongst some of the lower ones, but according to most national average, Tasmania is generally in the higher end of it, and so that reflects why people are seeing empty shops in the mall. It's simply because the locals are not supporting our local business. And so, as Councillor Soward suggested, we need to get people to amend their behaviour and think about that shopping experience, and don't complain when there's no shops to be had in the mall because you didn't support them when they were there. And so we need to make sure that we consider that before we do make a shopping decision. Having said that, I don't think we'll change the world overnight, but I do think that we need to try a trial. If nothing else, Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Whilst it's factually incorrect, there was no fiddles in the time of Nero. No, just briefly. I don't think it's something I want to be accused of, that we sat down and did nothing, and we must try something. And I do believe that a trial is something we should be thinking. So from that point of view, I won't be supporting this motion as it's written at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Daking.
Thank you, Mayor. I had to scribble a lot of my notes off because my fellow councillors have done such a great job covering all the points. Again, I'd like to thank our officers for providing a very detailed report, Frosty and the team. Today, obviously, we're here to make a decision that's been spoken about in the community for a lot of times, probably since parking meters have been installed. And I ask the question, does this council want to support our CBD, our business owners, our residents that like to come into the city and see different parking options? I'm not suggesting that this is the total answer, but I do believe it will form part of the solution. Part of our role as councillors is to be the gatekeepers of the city. And right now, I can tell you, some and a lot of our retailers are struggling. And a new parking strategy is one way to start showing, one, we care, we recognise this, and we're here to help. A 60 to 90-minute trial coinciding with a potential new parking strategy could be just the investment in our CBD that we need to see the restructuring again of the pricing and change the behaviours. Will this trial potentially change people's behaviours, shopping and parking?
how they interact with the CBD, well, no one truly knows. And I can't see how you can know by reading a report either. Numbers. If you know how to use them, you can get them to sing any song you want to hear. I'm not suggesting that the report we are voting on today is any kind of song. But I can tell you, by referring to 2006 in this report, that song is out of tune. In 2006, as Councillor Soward suggested, who was the number one song? I think that's what you suggested. I'm going to suggest who was the AFL Grand Final winner. Well, unless you're a West Coast supporter, who cares? It's completely, it wasn't Richmond, wasn't Hawthorn. It's completely irrelevant. I can tell you in 2006, I was working in an investment banking firm, and there was a statement with every external document that went out. Past performance is no indication of future returns. We have an opportunity here to create future returns by smart investment into our CBD and parking. Parking forms part of the future return of our city. Surely we can find a way to encourage more of the short-term shoppers that was suggested in this report are 20 times more valuable than commuters to the city. If this is correct, we then need to encourage these shoppers, these short-term parkers, to come into the city. And if this trial does get up, I believe that it will start to see the increase in the short-term shoppers. If you want to change people's behaviour again, and they don't want to change them, well, you have to do it for themselves. And yes, we all agree Launceston is a very conservative, and we all like to drive around and park outside the shop. I know my mother does it, my friends do it, I do it. And, you know, so to change it, we have to force it. So one idea of pushing the commuters out, creating more free spots for short-term shoppers, restructuring pricing and penalty, as Councillor Finlay has suggested, creating more capacity. These all form part of a new strategy. I've spoken to a lot of businesses, and I can tell you they're struggling. Not all of them are, but a lot of them are. Businesses speak to their customers, and their customers are telling them it's car parking, car parking, car parking. I'm not saying that's the only issue, but if that's one issue we know about, surely we can try and help to attempt to rectify it. The social impact of parking management, and this is from the report, is to manage council's parking capacity to achieve the highest net. I thought the next word was profit, but it's not. It's net benefit by generating turnover of parking spaces to allow equitable access across the CBD. Will providing 60 to 90 minutes provide this in a better sense? Again, we don't know. The report suggests that we don't. I suggest that we trial and see if it will. Since I've been elected to this council, my fellow councillors have shown leadership that sometimes has involved voting against the recommendations of council officers. It's not uncommon, and today I hope my fellow councillors show strong leadership again in supporting our community in not accepting the report and its recommendations. This report shows us why we can't. I want to see the report that shows us why we can.
Thank you. Right on time. Question from Councillor Finlay.
Thanks, Mayor. There's been a couple of references to 2006, but I just wanted to clarify that the parking data that we've used in the report to come to the recommendation is current data.
That's a question that's answered. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. In 2006 was the year my son started watching AFL football, so of course he's a West Coast Eagles fan, so I knew that one. I would begin by looking at, and they were great words by Councillor Daking. It was well argued. No, this is obviously going to be a close vote, and I do feel as though that reflects the difficulty of this discussion, I suppose. And I think to some extent, Mr. Henty from City Prom beat us to the punch by, ultimately calling for an agnostic approach to this, to not be talking about, what's best for one group or another group, because the CBD itself, as much as it's privately owned largely, it's also seen as a very public space for all of us. We feel like we own that space when we go there. You know, of course, there's places like the mall and that sort of thing. Ultimately, it's a large amount of private landowners. And so this is a convoluted problem. It's not as simple as, you know, what is potentially being suggested here, I don't think. And of course, you know, harking back to 2006, we did have a trial and it did not have a measurable impact. We can argue the, you know, pros and cons there. We do currently have free parking between 3:30 and 5:30 in a multi-storey car park. So to some extent, we do have examples and trials on offer, but, you know, I'm not sure what process it's going to be that involves us having less cars in the CBD, getting cooperative landlords, you know, to bring innovative businesses and to be innovative about how they rent out their properties, because, you know, not that we have a huge amount of empty properties in our town, but, you know, that's another part. How we encourage social enterprise in the CBD, how we deal with the public transport, all these things that have been mentioned. What we do about fringe parking, you know, at the end of the day, people will do what they do. The world has changed quickly around us. People don't change so quickly. I still expect to get a parking spot in Brisbane Street when I go down there, so I'm as guilty as anyone. You know, having said all that, you know, I do commend the report, and I also, you know, ask that, you know, anyone who you speak to send them to read that report. I think we're hamstrung until we address the whole problem, and we're going to create ourselves, you know, we're not going to solve any problems in this short step, I don't think, of introducing short-term free parking. I think we're going to potentially create some problems for ourselves in terms of our budget. We're going to create some problems potentially for pushing commuter parking outside the CBD if we are to start, you know, bringing in incremental charges to discourage those people parking there. And until we are prepared to sit down, and, you know, I don't think it's the biggest problem that we're facing today in the world at all, but unless we were to sit down and deal with all those things and more together as a community, not just as a council, I don't think we're going to get the solutions, and I think this is a simplistic solution for a complex problem. So, yeah, I'll be accepting the report.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, any other speakers? No? Deputy Mayor, you have the floor, the chair. I will just say a few words. I think a lot's been said that I'm not going to repeat it all, but just to say I don't believe strongly in a trial. I know the word trial keeps getting used. I don't believe in that, because I think a trial is something where people won't change their habits if they know it's something just for a few months and then who knows what. If you're going to do anything, it's got to be the real deal, and it's got to be something that is going to be longer term, and it's got to have an impact. I don't believe, like Councillor Spencer has said, that we should do it and then just have it impact the budget at all. I think what needs to be done is we need to model it to see if we do have a change of 60 to 90 minutes, that we do change the rates in the parking so that it becomes to balanced out, which can be done. Other cities have done that, and I don't see why we couldn't do that as a city. I know Hobart has done that. And I know that it's a very complex issue, and I agree with all the comments that have been made regarding that. But I still believe that there are people in our city who strongly believe that it is an issue, very much in their minds and in their heads. Whether it's true, I don't really know, but they believe it is true. I know of one person who's got a business in Hobart and here, where Hobart, they have their free 2 hours, or hour and a half or two, 1.5. They have that free. It's made when that came into his business, because he's got his business very close by to where obviously the free parking is, it made a significant difference. So he's convinced it will make a difference. I've got people up here that have been involved and say it doesn't make a difference. Now, I don't really know. I don't believe a trial is the way to find out. I believe you make a decision and say that this is the way we're going to do it. It's going to happen. Either it is or it isn't going to happen, and then people will need to start to work and get at it. I also believe with all the other comments that we'd love to make our city people orientated. It's something that I think's been important. The reports that we've done has showed that. However, I'm not seeing a buy-in from the public on that at the moment at all. And that's what really worries me. When I was speaking to some people recently in the public, or they approached me to have a chat, they said, Albert, you have a look at the areas of town that are struggling the most. St John Street, the Quadrant, Brisbane Street Mall. Do you know what the real difference is there? There's no cars parked out the front of those places. And that's how they view Launceston. They want to be able to go in their car, and like other people have said, Councillor Walker even said himself, would like to go and park right close by. You have a look at Charles Street. Parking both sides of the street. You very rarely see an empty shop for long. Very rarely. You go up and down that street, you see one come vacant, within a month or less, it's filled up. Now, I'm not saying I know the solution to all that, but I'm saying the real issue, to me, I thought wasn't parking, but I'm not sure. I believe, and I have got an alternate motion there, which you've all got a copy of, that should this motion not get up, that I would like to move, that we note the evidence base that's in the report, but also request the General Manager prepare a report which provides various options for the introduction of a free parking service in Council's multi-deck car parks for the first 60 to 90 minutes, and it should be presented to a Council meeting in August, or preferably in August, along with the outcomes of the shopping in the city report. And I think we're foolish to make a decision today without seeing that shopping in the city report. I don't know what it's going to tell us, but I would have thought that information should also help us in the decision that we make. So that is the motion that, should this not get up, that I will be putting after the vote. Thank you.
Back to you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. For me, what's really important in a number of speakers, and it's great that so many people spoke, a number of speakers have posed questions and made comments, and I want to respond to a couple of those. And the first one that I want to respond to is about the question of leadership and what leadership is, and whether listening is leadership, or taking action, or being, having strength to go against a recommendation, whether that's leadership. And to me, the type of leader that I want to be is a leader that makes data-driven decisions. The report that we have before us is an evidence-based report. It doesn't actually require of us to make assumptions or find solutions or think within our own minds about what the solution to the problem is. It actually presents it with current data, current actual real-time data about what the circumstances are in our off-street parking facilities. So for me, leadership today is actually about being strong and supporting members of our community that hold really passionate, potentially emotional positions. And to quote Councillor Walker, or sort of quote, sorry, I think there's a lot of, I'm not going to misquote you. I think there's a lot of emotion which is completely understandable in challenging times around complex issues, and that this is seen to be, this is the quote, a simplistic solution to a complex issue. And the part that I was going to say is that often when you've got complex systems and complex scenarios, it's really easy to find a simple target, but that's not, and to hold on to that really tightly, because if there are pressures and there's overwhelm, and people that are operating in retail at the moment, there are some that will be experiencing deep overwhelm and challenge internally, then you hold on to what you feel might make a difference. A number of people quoted calls that were made to us from retailers. And I had a call, and there was a lot of admitted assumption and feeling in the position presented in the conversation. And I asked the question, have you read the report? Have you seen the data that backs up the recommendation? And the answer was no. And I wonder whether the number of people that have responded to online social media surveys, and whether they be on the ABC or Chile or LA or Examiner or wherever they are, whether they make assumptions and whether they make a decision with feeling. And that's something that we all do in our lives, all day, every day. But when we're here at the council table and we're presented with a report that is provided with evidence-based data, then it's actually our responsibility to make a decision that's consistent with the evidence presented to us. There's no doubt, General Manager, that there's a real importance at the moment to find the internal
Your time's
resource.
up, Councillor.
Wow. Do I get an extension when I float?
No, 3 minutes, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? So it's lost. The motion is lost. It was 4-7, if you've got that. So I'll put my, Deputy, if you have the chair, I will put my alternate motion, which you all have a copy on it, that notes the evidence base provided in the report concerning the introduction of a free parking service in the council's multi-deck car parks for the first 60 to 90 minutes. Oh, it's up there on the screen for those who want to read it as well. So I won't read it out there. Move that.
Seconder for the motion. Thank you, Councillor Soward. Mayor, would you like to speak further?
Well, I think it's all been said before when I spoke before. So can I just finish first? I think I don't need to add a lot to what I've said. I think it's all been said, and it's not to say that we're making a definite decision today, but I think it's very good that we give it time to get back to shopping in the city report. We review that, help that to analyse any decision that we make into the future. Really is the stress that I want to stress, and that's why the time frame is in there. And looking forward to that report coming back to us. Thank you.
Back to you, Mayor.
Oh, well, since I've got my motion, I think it's best if you do it.
Question from Councillor Finlay.
I'm not sure if my question's to the mover or the General Manager. I don't quite understand the motion. I don't understand if the evidence in the report is being used to recommend the implementation of the services that we've got, how you can do that. My question is, how do you do this?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I don't read it that way. I think obviously I've been asked to do a separate, noting the evidence that's been provided today, and I've been asked to do a separate piece of work around introduction of various options to introduce a free parking service. So that's the way I read it. So.
For 60 to 90 minutes?
Yes.
Councillor Soward.
Just reserve my right at the moment, thanks.
Any other contributions? Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. Look, I'll just briefly state that I think that if the reason for thinking that free parking is going to make a difference to the fact that Birchall's has gone, because the mall was mentioned as having empty shops, and essentially we're talking about Birchall's having moved out, I think that's a completely reductive argument. Birchall's moved for a number of reasons, clearly. The quadrant's emptied for a number of reasons that are completely unrelated. And adding everything together that looks like it might be about parking and then saying this is why retail is failing, it doesn't make any sense to me. So I'd say that the reason Birchall's has gone is threefold probably. People are reading books on tablets, people are studying on computers, and we approved a big box development completely in competition to them just on the outskirts of town. So we kind of can't have it both ways. If we wanted to keep Birchall's, then we probably shouldn't have moved their main competitor just down the road. So I think this is reductive. I think this is completely political. I think people campaigned on free parking to get elected to council, and that's why we're having this debate again. I don't think this is going to help, and I'm really disappointed that it's become so highly politicised.
Any other contributions? Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Deputy. Here's a problem. 2012 there's 5,464 businesses in Launceston. 2016 it went down by 269. That is a problem, and we've got to do something about it to try and help it. And this could be it. I hope it is. It might not be, but we've got to trial it. Or, like the Mayor says, bring it in and we'll see what happens. Thank you.
General Manager, we do have one member around the table who's saying they don't understand the motion. What is your recommendation in terms of ensuring councillors do understand what they are voting upon? How could we gain a deeper understanding so that all members of the council understand the words of the motion?
I mean, all I can do is go through it and give you the way I read it, which if you allow me to turn and have a read. So basically, we've obviously had the debate today, and you've considered the evidence, and that's being noted by this motion, which is the respectful thing to do. Now I'm being requested to prepare a report, which is not necessarily linked; it's separate. It's not actually to the evidence which has been provided. It looks at various options for the introduction of free parking. So ultimately, I'm to provide another paper looking specifically at various options for introducing a 60 to 90 minute free parking options to the council. but that should be considered in light of the Shopping in the City report, which is due in about 3 weeks' time. So,
thank you. Subsequent question, Councillor Finlay.
What was the question that was asked that created the current report?
It's in the actual report. It's in the agenda.
I just read it. Would you be able to clarify how that differs to this question?
So the original notice of motion requested the General Manager to complete a report and provide a suitable evidence base for the Council to consider the introduction of a free parking service in Council's multi-storey car parks for the first 60 to 90 minutes. So that, and which has just been fulfilled. We've provided an evidence base for you to consider. It's just been considered, and then you've asked me to go and do another report to look specifically at options.
General Manager speaking, thank you.
Specifically for options to introduce a free service. That's the way I read it. So that's been fulfilled, and I'm being requested to provide a new report looking specifically at options for introducing.
Any other contributions from around the table? Councillor Daking, a question?
Thank you, Deputy. Just on that, General Manager, so with this new evidence-based report, we're looking to see how we can introduce 60 to 90 minutes and how we can cover / offset the potential loss of revenue.
Well, it doesn't say that, but that's yeah. No, as I understand it, I'm to present various options, specifically looking at the introduction. So that will look at different things like funding sources.
Thank you.
Any other questions or contributions? Councillor Sowry.
Thanks, Deputy. And just as the seconder of the motion, obviously, Mr Mayor, thank you for bringing this in as an alternative, given the first one was voted down. I think it's very, very sensible, and I look forward to the report coming back to the Council.
Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just in support of the motion, I think that the General Manager needs to look at all options for the free parking within the multi-deck car parks, although I guess in my reading of it, I only understood it to be the two in Patterson Street and perhaps not Elizabeth Street, but I'll leave you to determine that. And also to look at other options for on-street free parking that may also be of benefit. And what I'm thinking of there is technology exists for us to understand when a car has exceeded its time by sign or by meter, to then alert a parking officer that car needs to be moved on, if you like, or booked. And I think there's good examples in many places around the world where that has been used to provide free on-street parking for shoppers to come in for maybe one shop for half an hour. And so I fully understand that this is telling you to only look at the multi-deck. If the opportunity presents itself to look at options to go beyond that into the free parking also provided by, or the parking provided by council in on-street, and that may be part of your solution, I'd be certainly supportive of seeing some of those ideas as well. But I'm happy with the motion just as it is at the moment. I do realise what I've said is outside that motion, but I do think we have to put it all on the table and not just be too restrictive of what we're looking for on if we're going to have free parking. It may be that perhaps on-street free parking being expanded may be a better option, but maybe we need to come back on that. I guess I could amend it to do that, perhaps as good advice.
Is that what you're wishing to do?
Looking around the table, perhaps that's what I ought to do, if there's the support or the will around the table, to amend to include, I guess, not only the multi-deck car parks, but also the on-street car park, free on-street car parking as well. I'm not saying totally free everywhere, just to be sure. A limited number of spaces that had a sensor put under them so that you could understand when a car had driven into it.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Yeah. So, notwithstanding that significantly changes what was placed on the agenda, General Manager, is that within the realm of the meeting or outside of the scope?
within the realm of the meeting to request a report be prepared. It can't be delivered within the time frame that's in that current motion. If you're going to, that's a completely different exercise that's being suggested as looking at the multi-stories, which largely we've done the multi-story scenarios. So so that would need to be reviewed if that motion were to be successful.
Based on that advice, do you want to proceed with your amendment and look for a seconder?
No, I think we'll wait for the report back on what he has and we'll see how we go from there.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Finlay.
I think I'm slowly catching up with my fog. So can I just clarify to the mover of the motion that in fact is what you're asking the General Manager to do to provide a report to implement 60 to 90 minute parking with disregard to the evidence?
No, not at all. What I'm asking you to do is prepare a report to come up with how, if we do go ahead with 60 or 90 minute free, how we can structure the pricing so we can continue to meet our budget and meet the evidence in the report that is available to use that as we need it to make our decision.
Thank you, Mayor. Subsequent question, Councillor Finlay.
So it might be, for instance, that the report might recommend that you implement 60 to 90 minutes free parking from 3:30, for instance. Like that could be, that's like a scenario that might be possible. So then if the Mayor as mover of the motion is asking for a report to be provided based on evidence, then can you do that given qualified advice? Like how does qualified advice and evidence balance itself in responses to motions if the Mayor has confirmed that he's asking for it to be based on evidence?
General Manager.
I have little difficulty in being able to write a report that I've been asked to write a report to give options to the Council to consider introduce the 60 to 90. I certainly can provide that with professional advice for you to enable you to make a decision around that. Again, it is a separate piece of work to the work you've just read here now in the report that you've just considered.
Thank you, General Manager. Any further contributions? Mayor, do you wish to close?
I think we'll put the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favour, raise their hand. Those against? The motion is carried. Back to you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 18.1, Raglan Street. Oh, Hugh. Yep. Sorry. Welcome back, Hugh. So 18.1, someone happy to move? Highway closure? No? Oh, Councillor Mackenzie, thank you. Is there a second to Councillor Finlay, was that? Or Councillor Spencer? You wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I think it's just in line with what's been going on with the development that we approved a few weeks ago. So I think it's just appropriate. It's sort of going to make sure we cut down the rat run through that area.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer, wish to speak? Any councillor wish to speak? Councillor Finlay, question?
Just wondering, in consideration of the closure and the question that was raised when the planning item came up, that is this one, isn't it? This is the one that's close to Bunnings. Yeah, when the planning item came up, what the resolution was around consideration for construction access and that sort of thing. We asked the question at the time, just out of interest.
So the staging of the development will provide access, and I think there was a subsequent staging plan that was agreed and conditioned on the development permit. There is a subsequent plan at the end of that report which shows the overall scheme, which is obviously to be developed in stages.
Question, Councillor Walker?
Yes, I've just a question for our officers. Is there definitive evidence that this closure will stop the so-called rat run? Depending on future developments in the area, traffic snarls in one way or another, how can we possibly know that this route won't still be used as a shortcut from one part of Launceston to another?
The action is to deter the rat run. We're not putting any traffic restrictions on private vehicle movement, but certainly seeking to take action to reprioritise choices that vehicle users can use in using that route. So at the moment there was a very direct opportunity for a thoroughfare. We're thinking we're taking reasonable action to deter that as far as practical.
As I asked, is there any evidence that it will actually have that effect? Because I do know of similar situations where people still choose to use such thoroughfares, even though they're being deferred from. They just use it, cursing the blocked road as they do it.
No direct evidence other than our practice in other development around the city.
Any other speakers, questions? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present, I think, Tim? All councillors present, that is carried. So we go on to 18.2, the concessional entry. Moved, Deputy Mayor. Seconded, Councillor Mackenzie. Wish to speak to it, Deputy?
Briefly, thank you, Mayor. This is the 10th year that Council has allowed for this provision for not-for-profit charitable organisations to apply and receive an amount to enable them to dispose of things through the centre. It has been really impressive over the last 7 years to note the improvements that have been made in this area. The requirements for organisations to actually have a waste management plan, the requirement for them to work with our waste officers to remove things that can be recycled and reused from their waste streams, and I guess generally to see the improvement that all of them have wanted to make to their own practices to see improved results. You'll note that we set aside a budget that is in fact greater than what is recommended today, which is very pleasing because it says that organisations are doing more to divert usable streams from that was previously going to landfill. Really want to thank and commend the work of Jess and Michael and Rachel, who are doing such great endeavours in this area. And I guess one of the great things over the last 7-8 years as part of the Community Grants panel has been to see the improvements and the welcomed enhancements that this particular program is having in our community. This is another of the many untold things that we do as an organisation to support our community, particularly the not-for-profits in our community who do such great work. So I recommend it to you as presented.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Mackenzie?
Yes, just before I speak on it as the seconder of the motion, I just wanted to double check that there are no sort of circumstances that have increased the value sought by City Mission, given that's a significant upgrade on what they were given last year, and given they're doing a lot of things in the city that they haven't actually added to their bow, which would suggest we should be thinking otherwise than what we are.
Thank you. Mr. Scurvy.
So the recommendation is based on 80% of their volume from last year's program. No further information than that from them. We're obviously working closely with all of the parties involved in terms of minimising their waste streams, but that's based off their forecast utilisation.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just querying whether they've taken on any other programs that were different to what they did last year, which would mean their waste levels are higher as a result, that's all. If they haven't raised it, then it's quite okay. Yep, okay.
Not that we're aware of.
Therefore, if I can speak now, do you want to ask a question first?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Deputy Mayor.
Mr Mayor, would it not be correct that organisations frequently apply for a very large out-of-the-box creative figure without necessarily applying any science to it, and that we who have the data from the transfer station, from the gate and from the built-up 10 years are able then to apply an appropriate formula in coming to the recommendation provided?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Councillor.
And whilst I'm aware that is the case, Deputy Mayor, I thought the circumstances, given the number of activities City Mission take on, there may well have been some other activities that we weren't aware of that are new to their band. But having said that, I think the policy is really well established. It's certainly very clear to the people who are applying for concessional entry to the tip, that we're looking for them to reduce their emissions into the tip, and therefore we're going to be scaling down over time, which is the way that this has been adopted. So from my perspective, it's a great policy. Everybody's clear and understand what it is. They prosecute their case and then you determine based on that prosecution. But I think that it's certainly a really good message that we're sending out to the whole of our community, not just the community that we're giving concessions to.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. Unfortunately, when council does things like this, it's something that's not readily acknowledged, and I just wanted to add my voice to Councillor Gibson and Councillor McKenzie's words. When you look at these wonderful organisations and what they do, and you look at what we're doing, I guess, as a way of supporting that, I think that is something to be very proud of. They do wonderful work. Going through a lot of these, the old saying, running off the smell of an oily rag, is one that you probably say runs with all of them. They do great things, and if there's something that we can do that helps that out, I'm very proud of that, and I think it's a great thing. There's a number of different organisations there, which again shows how many, organisations we have that work in this space, and I think it's a great thing.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor, you wish to close?
Just to say, in line with constant evaluation, it's all done online now, which shows, I guess, that constant need to improve and review what we do. And all applications this year from all organisations were received online, which is credit to the team.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.1. The Local Government Association General Meeting. Move, Councillor McKenzie. Is that for the lot as per the recommendations? Yeah. Councillor Soward seconded. Do you wish to speak to it all, Councillor McKenzie?
Look, I will, only because I think it does deserve speaking on, given it is our Local Government Association, it is the General Meeting, and there are some reasonably meaty issues that have been raised within the agenda for that general meeting, and I'd like to commend the work and the responses that have been given by the City of Launceston officers in relation to each of the items. To me, they were clear, unequivocal about what they were referencing in regards to where we were supporting and where we weren't supporting, and as a consequence that makes my job a lot easier in what I do. So thank you for that, and I'll be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. Councillor McKenzie has said it all, that in moving it as a job lot, I call it the McKendrick job lot, as he was very famous for that.
Thank you. And Councillor Dawkins.
Just briefly, I'd like to add that I'm delighted to see the work on sustainability, waste reduction and climate change mitigation in this list, and also feral cats. We do talk about feral cats a lot, but I like also seeing the words direct action. It would be good this time if we could actually see some action out of any work that we do on feral cats, because as far as I can see, the problem's getting worse, not better. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor McKenzie, wish to close?
I will close because Councillor Dawkins has actually reminded me in a past life I was also on the committee for Tamar NRM, and Tamar NRM actually had a cat management plan that they were pushing forward, which got overtaken by the government, for which little action appears to have happened subsequently. So I would probably just suggest we refer back to Tamar NRM as to what their views on in relation to the cat management, and maybe that's something that can be resurrected back through the state government.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. The motion is carried. So 19.2 is the AGM. Again, they're all there. The comments. Anyone happy to move it as is? Councillor McKenzie, thank you. Is there a seconder? Deputy Mayor, thank you. Councillor McKenzie, wish to speak to it? Deputy Mayor. Anyone wish to comment, speak, question? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 20.1. Move, Councillor McKenzie. Seconded, Councillor Cox. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie?
Just to endorse the nominations that have been made for the positions, I think that's great. And I think people who have worked with a lot of other luminaries in the past who have worked out of this organisation. So I hope that the councillors see fit to vote in favour of this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Cox.
Just to endorse the comments by Councillor Mackenzie, and a good decision, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we have no other items, no closed items, so we'll close the meeting. Thank you all very much.
Council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio